was I? Was I saying something brilliant yet? No, not yet. Very good. That's important. Okay. That is something brilliant. That's another story. Okay, so I love this setup because this is a wonderful event. Again, I thank you very much for inviting me back and helping to give some context to all the other wonderful speakers and decisions, and talking a little bit about what's going on in the labor market. I think the labor market is sort of a microcosm of a lot of things that you're related to. So we go back and we talk about what's going on in terms of family formation. Did a presentation last week in Washington dealing with the issue of healthy marriages and healthy families. And all of that starts with employment, right? So employment and what's going on in the labor market are strong components to almost every other aspect that you're doing. So while I get introduced as a demographer, I have no background or knowledge at all in the area of demography. But I am a labor market economist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little about some of the things that are going on in the Texas economy, in the Austin economy, and then what's going on, how they're influencing job creation and the labor market. So as we go, did we do something? So as we go along, if you have any questions or something really strikes you, just raise your hand, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions. Okay, are we good? Good. All right, I know this is a no-nonsense group, so I'm going to get right into it. By the way, anybody wants to find me, I am the Texas LMI guy. All right, that's TXLMI and at Gmail. Okay. Oh, and by the way, any of the slides that you want, anybody wants any of these slides, you're more than welcome to them. I will charge you exactly what Jane is charging me to be here, which is my honorarium in one of those little foil packets back over there. Absolutely. Really got to rethink this business. Okay. Let me start off is, it's nothing like having an economist to address a group like that, and every economist sort of has a different way of thinking about the world. Harry Truman once said, all my economists say on the one hand, on the other hand, what I really need is a one-handed economist. And there just is no such thing, all right? So what we're going to do is something that I call telling an economic story. So on my business card it says TXLMI guy, an economic storyteller. So today I am your economic storyteller trying to put together some combination of data and stories and some economic theory to be able to get a sense of where the labor market is. Because I don't have a crystal ball, and nobody else does either, but we have a sense of where the labor market is headed and some things that are fairly certain. So we're going to talk about those things. Now, one of the interesting things when you listen to most economists is they will give you more factoids than you could possibly shake a stick at. They will give you data like nobody's business, because that's what we do. In fact, that's what we love to do. The more data that we can give somebody, the more excited we are. But the part that we usually miss is the why do I care component, all right? Why do I care? And so the why do I care component is what we're trying to interject here. So when you start looking at some of this information on this labor market discussion side, general macroeconomic conditions, why do you care about what's going on in the general economy as a whole? Well, the first thing you want to know is there just enough overall economic activity to generate jobs, period, much less specific kinds of jobs, much less jobs that pay appropriate levels of wages. Number two, growing and declining industry sectors. Why do I care about which industries are growing and which ones are declining? Well, it makes a big difference in terms of which industries and which companies within those industries are most likely to hire. Number three here, industry staffing and occupational demand. Interesting economic-y kind of term. All that means is for every one of those growth industries and growth companies, there are specific occupations and skill sets that are in demand. There's a lot of industries that are growing that have specific occupational skills that they need and a whole bunch of other skills that they don't. So the relationship between industries and occupations is really important. This real-time job postings is the most cool thing that we've been doing lately, which is the ability to go out and scour the internet and look at all those online job postings, categorize them, use some natural language processing algorithms to be able to categorize them, and then say, hey, what's going on out there in the labor market? What's going on now? What's in demand? What do those skills look like? And I'm going to show you some of that data later on. So this whole what's hot now, if you need a job today, you want to know what's in demand today, not what those 5-year and 10-year projections look like. The last one here, technology changes and new business practices. How many of you are in a workplace environment where the skill set that is in demand today looks a little different than what it did 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and 10 years ago? All right? I will guarantee you that for almost all of us, staying still is not an option for keeping our jobs. So if you're staying still, you are moving backwards in terms of labor market skills and demands. We'll talk a little bit about that. Why do we care? Because as technology, especially technology, affects hiring requirements and skill needs. There's a dirty little secret in the world of education. We still teach in a lot of programs stuff that was in demand in 1963, right? That is not necessarily in demand today. So there's a number of our educational institutions are trying to do a much better job of aligning the learning objectives in those various courses with what's going on in the labor market. That's a very progressive way of thinking about the world. Does it happen consistently across the board at every institution, in every program? And the answer is no. There's a whole lot of mismatch going on. But that's particularly important because guess what? Education and training, labor supply, data, grads, and earnings. Which education programs offer the best prospects? Does every education program, does every major result in the same post-exit or postgraduate earnings for those students? And the answer is not even close. And the more I have been involved in this business, the more bifurcation of earnings that I see in terms of programs. So there are some majors that you can go and you can get a degree. And you say, I have a credential. And you're asking, the number one question that goes along with that is, do you want fries with that? All right, we've got a lot of that going on. On the other hand, we've got a lot of programs where the post-exit one-year graduation results are resulting in six-figure salaries. So you've got some huge differences, some huge bifurcation of earnings. So we're going to talk about all of those things. All right. Now, themes. Here's some quick themes. This is what we see going on. The Texas economy and the Austin economy in particular has been stronger than the national economy by far. How many of you feel like you're still in a recession? Anybody feel like you're still in a recession? Anybody feel like you were in a recession at all? Period, ever. Right? If you're in Houston, you get the exact same results. Nobody raises their hand. You know, it seems like the recession is so long ago, but there are still parts of this country that are still very much mired in at least an employment-centered recession. Where are my HR people? HR people? Okay, you will recognize this term. One of the reasons why we've had a lot of slow uptake in terms of employment and reemployment in the post-recession period is you've got your HR people, you've got companies looking for pink squirrels and purple unicorns. Right? And you go, well, I don't ever remember seeing that in the job description anywhere. What are these pink squirrels and purple unicorns? They are people, before we hire somebody and bring them on the payroll, because it's so damn hard to get rid of them, we get the wrong ones, all right? Before we hire them, we want somebody to have the exact education, credentials, experience, oh, and by the way, the right behaviors and attitudes associated with that. We want somebody perfect. And that perfect person is so unique, it might as well be a pink squirrel or purple unicorn. Now, if I'm hiring and I'm looking at the labor market today and I know how hard it is and how important it is that I get the right fit for somebody, is that something that I'm going to do? Does that make perfect business sense for me? And the answer is yes, absolutely it does. But what it's also done is slow the uptake of employment, especially for a lot of those workers who don't find themselves with the skills, experience, and background to be pink squirrels and purple unicorns. All right, number 3, demographic shifts. Where we live, what we look like is changing markedly all over the states. Particularly interesting. Every state has its own unique regional differences. I will guarantee you that the Austin economy, the Panhandle economy, and the Baytown economy all look very different. All right, and we're going to see that a little bit in the data here. Number 5, the recent job growth has been largely fueled by 3 major economic tent posts. I was reviewing my January presentation, because we just did this in January, right? I had to do that because I want to make sure I didn't tell all the same jokes. You know, it's one thing when I have a mixed audience, but something about dealing with women. You guys remember all of that stuff. This thing. Anybody remember what I wore last year? Blue suit, that's exactly right, blue suit. Because what you don't know is that I have to keep track of those things so I don't wear the same thing for a repeat audience. My wife made me do that. Okay. Interesting, however, when we start looking at these 3 economic tent posts, they are essentially the same ones that they have been the last several years coming out of the recession. Number 1 is everything related to population growth. So we've had some significant population growth. You've certainly seen it in Austin. You've seen it in all the major metropolitan areas in Texas and throughout the state. The most important part of that is when the population is growing, which industries are growing? And there are 3 major industries that sit underneath that. For population growth, number 1 is what?
Oil and gas.
Not oil and gas. And population growing, health, everything that's related to healthcare. Number 2 is education. All right, education, because guess what? Construction is going to be there and housing is going to be there, but it's taken us a while. We had a lot of houses that were, we had supply, still on the stock. So what we're talking about is number one is housing, is education. Number two is healthcare. And number three is retail therapy, otherwise known as, all right, this is the leisure, hospitality, and leisure services. Because what do all those people coming to town, what do? They shop, all right? They shop and they buy. The number one growth occupation in the Austin area is retail salespeople, all right? Which is interesting because I'm going to show you a bubble chart here in a couple of slides. It's particularly interesting. It shows all the earnings and the number of job openings. It's really cool. And I had to take one occupation off the chart because it screwed up the cosmetics of it so bad, and it was retail sales that had over 1,000 annual average job openings, but the average wage was down around about $22,000 a year, right? And it just absolutely skewed my chart, so I had to take it off. All right, so those three in population. Number two is everything up and down the oil and gas supply chain. Now, you don't see a lot of that here in Austin, but you do see some of the business, professional, and technical services, the financial services that are affected here in the Austin economy a little bit. But the rest of the state, I will guarantee you, it has been, as one gentleman said not too long ago to me, it has been an oily recovery. All right. So when we talk about everything up and down the oil and gas supply chain, we're not only talking about those guys that are out there on the rigs, guys and gals, by the way, but we are talking about the whole range of manufacturing, of professional technical services, of the construction utility. Somebody has to create those pads. Somebody has to make those pipes and valves and all the rest of that stuff. Here's the other interesting thing about that. Is, we've got all this fracking and horizontal drilling and all this stuff going on. You say, wow, that's all oil and gas related stuff. They've got some of that up there in North Dakota, right? And they got some of that over there in Pennsylvania and the like. But that's relatively new for them. So when they have all of that economic activity in the oil and gas sector, where do they go to get the people who understand how it all works, right? How to get it out, how to get it out of the ground, how to process and how to move it. Where do they go for their talent? They go to Texas, because we know that stuff. Where do they get their valves and their pipes and all their other materials? They go to Texas, because we're accustomed to doing that. So when you see all that oil and gas stuff going on in North Dakota and Wyoming and Montana and over in Pennsylvania and the like, where are they going? They're coming here to get all of their ancillary and support activities. That's helping to generate growth here in our economy. And last but not least is professional and business services. Just by the very nature of this title, would you say high skill or low skill kinds of occupations? Mostly high skill, with one interesting exception. And that is in this economic category that we call business and professional services, about half of it is high skill computer design services, specialized design services, architectural services, high skill, high wage occupations. The other half is essentially personnel supply services. It's everything that we would call the temp industry, all right? So very interesting bifurcation of industries and jobs, even within one major industry title. Number 6, occupational demand is becoming more bifurcated. I mean, you woke up this morning and said, damn, I hope that economist uses the word bifurcated at least once. Anybody? It's, I can't use fruffery? What is it, legal fruffery? What was that? Love that word. I can just remember what that is because we got economic fruffery all over the place. So bifurcated. What we've got is employers continue to emphasize skill sets and experience. You won't hear me say much today about degrees per se, but you will hear me use the word skill frequently. You will hear me use the word experience. And as we start talking about experience and skills, what we're trying to do is look at the labor market in a more granular way below occupational titles. How many of you have a job title or know of a job title that you couldn't explain to your mother or your grandmother? You seen any of these job titles? What's really interesting is how do we know what skill sets sit underneath those when we have these job titles that nobody understands? Now, if I'm the Associate Vice President of Widget Manufacturing and Promoting, what do? I don't know. You don't know, but more important, the educational community doesn't necessarily know. So if you're trying to get them to make sure that they're producing enough of those people to be able to fit those jobs, where's the communication happening? How are you communicating? What skills need to be taught? What knowledges need to be taught to make sure you've got the right skill sets over here? That disconnect process is a real challenge today. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And last but not least, you will not hear me talk about information technology as an industry. You will not hear me talk about information technology as an occupation or as a college major. But rather, IT, information technology, is a ubiquitous skill set that crosses every industry and occupation. When you hear people talk about the digital divide, all that's telling you is those people that have mastery of advanced analog and digital skills, comfort level, regardless of their discipline, are going to do well. Those people are afraid of working with technology, don't know how to integrate technology in a problem-solving environment. And I don't care whether you're in construction, healthcare, or manufacturing, if you have that discomfort, you're on the other side of that digital divide. And believe me, from an earnings standpoint, that digital divide makes a huge difference in terms of earnings. It's part of that bifurcation argument. Okay, there's my themes. So people say, well, Rich, what kind of economy has it been? It really has been, by and large, a Goldilocks economy. Not too hot, not too cold. It's really been just about right. Not anywhere near what we would have hoped to see. But one of the things that we have seen is consistent. See, I think we're now at about 55 or 56 consecutive months of job growth. All right, nice, even, steady growth. Nothing like we would have hoped to have seen or thought we would have seen coming out of the recession. But the interesting thing is that recovery has been so gradual that what it's done is sort of set off the prospects of a next recession. I was at a seminar last week with IHS Global Insights, it's a global economic consulting firm, and usually they do projections of the next recession. And I said, none of your projections through 2020 or 2022 include the prospects of another recession. And they said, no, the recovery has been so gradual, right? Read slow, gradual, that we don't see any overheating that would lead to another series of recessions. That's kind of an important big macro picture, because if you don't think there's going to be another big recession that's on the horizon, you start making additional or different kinds of investment decisions along the way. So, a little bit about the national recovery. I love to show these slides because I think this really hits a lot to the why do I care part. This slow national, not enough hiring for everybody. This blue line right here is new hires, national new hires. Before the recession, national new hires were clipping along at around 5.3 million. Dipped during the recession significantly and have this nice, long, slow recovery, right? Nice pattern, right? Nice upward growth pattern. But take a look at this. It's upward here down to around 4.8 million. The difference between 4.8 million and 5.3 million is 500,000, right? 500,000 difference. That's one of the reasons why people go, you know, it just doesn't seem like it's been a recovery. Well, it's a nice recovery, but we went down so low, we have so far to go, that it just hasn't got to where we were before. And this whole, we just haven't got to where we were before, is one of these things that we all sort of, intrinsically feel that we're not back to where we want to be. Other interesting thing here, this red line is separations. These are people that leave the job, either voluntary or involuntary, right? Notice that they walk and talk almost the same as a new hire. You go, well, Rich, that's interesting. Why does that happen? Think about this. What is the unemployment rate? Around 5%-ish, right? Okay. The unemployment rate is like 5%. What's the employment rate? It's like 95%, right? Well, if the employment rate is 95%, that means everybody that's in the labor force, 95% of them are working. All that means is when there's a new job that comes up, what are the odds that that job is going to be filled by somebody that's already in the labor market and already working? Well, it's really good, especially if business is looking for pink squirrels and purple unicorns, right? Because those people who are unemployed more than likely are not pink squirrels and purple unicorns. So as you're cherry picking, as you're looking for the right candidates, for the job, the odds that you're going to pull from the ranks of the already employed are very, very high, which is why this separations number goes the way it is. The other thing you say is, well, Rich, you say they're voluntary versus involuntary. There's a huge difference between getting laid off and choosing a next job, right? So the blue line is quits, the red line is layoffs. Notice that during the recession, layoffs went way up and came down relatively quickly and are sort of trending down. Why do I care? Kind of means if I've got a job, there's a pretty good chance I can keep my job, all right? They're not threatening by that. But this is the most important number. Notice that quits were rising significantly before the recession. Then they absolutely cratered during the recession. Why would people not leave a job during a recession? Go figure, all right? So interestingly, when we start looking at this here now, the quits, this nice, steady growth here, almost like the new hires, right? So this looks pretty good. People leave their jobs when they feel what? They can go get another job or a next job. So this is really good. It's really positive. But where is it? It's still way below that confidence level that we were before. So those two indicators all by themselves, new hires and quits, tell us that we're doing really well in terms of recovery. We just don't quite intrinsically feel it because we just weren't where we were when things were rocking and rolling before the recession. Okay. Now, here in Austin, these numbers are a little different. So when I look at quits, I can't look at this exact same series in Austin because the data series is only at the national level, but I have some comparable data. And when I do this quits number right here for Austin, the trajectory on this is way up here, all right? That means in Austin, our consumer confidence, if you will, our labor market confidence, is at a much higher trajectory. Okay. As the designated demographer for this group, all right, was trying to find some interesting trends or patterns that you really, I think, need to worry about. And one of those is for all those people that really are pink squirrels and purple unicorns, that have skills, that have transferable skills, they're going to be fine. Matter of fact, they're doing quite well. The thing we're worried about are those people that are not. Many of them are structurally unemployed. It means they simply do not have the skill sets or the educational background needed to get a job, one, but more importantly, to get a job that's going to allow them to pay a living wage and support a family. So one of the things we're looking at here is this U6 unemployment. This is the unemployment rate over here, around 12.2%. This is the rate that includes marginally attached workers, discouraged workers, people who've just completely given up looking for work, or those people that are working part-time but want to be working full-time. All right? So when we look at what they call the real unemployment rate, it's up here around 12%. The number that I want you to look at is this red line here. This is the duration. This is the length of time that somebody is unemployed, average unemployed. So notice that it was down here, around 15, 16 weeks before the recession. Really rose here during the recession. And notice that it's recovering, it's coming down, but it's still staying stubbornly high. Why is that? You've got a big chunk, somewhere around 500,000 people in this country, whose average duration to unemployment is around 37 weeks or higher. 37 weeks or higher. It's a structural component of the economy. You've got a big chunk of folks that simply are not enjoying the fruits of the recovery. And these are two ways to think about that. Okay, here's the next thing I want to do. And I'm going to get rid of all these macro things, but if I don't do at least a few of these, I lose my economics license, all right? So you'll have to stay with me. This decoupling that they talk about, this decoupling, anybody feel like your 401ks and your investments seem to be doing pretty well these days? That's part of that. If you got it, if you're one of the it people, you're doing pretty dang good, all right? But if you're not one of the it people, this bifurcation, this separation of earnings is a big deal. So here's an interesting chart. This blue is S&P 500. This is the financial markets. Notice that it's been doing pretty well, especially since 2013. That's a fairly nice upward trajectory. Now these are index numbers, so don't worry about anything other than the direction of the line. This green line here is the gross domestic product. That's all the outputs of goods and services, right? That's just output measured in dollars. And then this is the employment associated with that. Now notice, what are the two components that are really growing? Well, financial markets are doing pretty nicely. And we do know, by the way, cocktail party factoid number one for the day, we do know that in this S&P 500, about 49.5% of all last quarter's earnings from the S&P 500 came from sales outside the United States. Outside the United States. Almost half of the profits and earnings came from outside the United States. So profitability is up. Gross domestic output, with the exception of that little hiccup the first quarter of this year, is doing pretty nicely. But look how we've managed to do that. Look how we've managed to increase profitability and to increase output with fewer jobs. In economics, we call it productivity. All right? Productivity good or productivity bad? Everybody got your business hat on? Productivity good. Productivity really good. All right? Really good. Now, what happens if you're trying to find a job? Productivity bad. Really bad. All right? So it's an interesting decoupling of output, jobs, and the financial markets. All right. We talk a little bit about what's going on in the labor market, where we live, how are we changing, what's the job market like, that's my demographics requirements, and where the hiring been and some future job prospects and some things. Here's the total population growth, the counties that have been adding in the state, adding the most population. You go, why do I care about population? Because from our population comes our labor force, all right? It also comes our retail therapy customers, all right? So if there's nobody coming in, they're not buying, and over 70% of the economy of all the goods and services sold are in and done by the consumer sector. So population matters on a couple of different fronts. Right here, here's our biggies: Harris County, San Antonio, Dallas and Tarrant, and right here, Austin. Increase of 59,000. I'm pretty sure I saw them all on I-35 going home last night. I think they all came with their own cars and their own problems. But interestingly, right here, this clearly is part of this Texas Triangle growth pattern here. And not only that is Austin Travis, but look down here. What else we got here? Round Rock, okay? And we got San Marcos, all right? So you've got in this top 20, you've got several in this area. A lot of population growth. You go rich. Again, why do I care about population? Because the industries that are going to be adding jobs because of that population are related to healthcare, education, and retail-related stuff. All right. A little bit about demographics. I think this is a really important slide. How many of you are dealing directly with young people anywhere between the ages of 18 and 25? Okay, Drew, right. Do they seem like you were at 18 and 25? No. Do they seem to have that was easy. Do they seem to have a different value system relative to the world of work and work-life balance and other kinds of things? Yeah. Do they seem to be making choices based on factors that weren't the same factors that some of us who are baby boomers made? And the answer to all of those questions is, yeah, they're just a little different. Anybody remember, let's see, there's only a couple of us that are really old in here, but anybody remember when we came into the labor market, what the generation before us said about us?
We were lazy.
Oh man, we were lazy, we weren't dedicated, we didn't have any skills, and we listened to that damn rock and roll. There was no future for us, all right? So every generation talks about the subsequent generations. They're not like us and we were good, all right? Really, the truth of the matter is, it's just different. But the difference matters. And so the difference is going to matter, and this is why. These blue bars here, these baby boomers, this is 2000, this is 2012. Notice these blue bars. Here's our baby boomers. These are the people that are employed in the labor market. So back here, baby boomers, 2000, Gen Xers in red, and in green are our millennials or our Gen Ys, all right? Notice that back in 2000, we didn't even think about these Gen Ys, these Gen Ys and millennials down here. We did care about the baby boomers. If all of these baby boomers happen to leave the labor market at the same time, and this is the only people we had to replace them, were we setting ourselves up for some serious shortages? And the answer is, yeah, that's a problem. Interestingly, however, the decade unfolds. As I like to say, damn, baby boomers didn't leave. All right, they stayed in the labor market. About the same number of Gen Xers, a little more Gen Xers. But here's the interesting phenomenon. These millennials start coming of age. And they start coming of age, and they start entering the labor market, and they start entering the labor market, and they really start entering the labor market in droves. In which economic time frame? One of the worst that this country has ever seen. And anybody that has done career research knows that if you get your career started off on a track that's relatively below your education and earnings level, your expected earnings level, in other words, underemployed, getting back to that trajectory that will take you forward is a real challenge. So the millennial generation has had a real interesting challenge as they come into the labor market in droves. Now, here's the thing I want you to pay attention to. Back in 2002, 44% of all the employed folks in the labor market were baby boomers. All right? By the time we got to 2012, only 31% of employment in this state were baby boomers. In the meantime, in 2002, 8% of the employment was these millennials. By 2012, they are 29% of the labor market. They are not just an addendum to the demographics of this state. We figure by 2017 there will be more employed millennials and Gen Ys in the labor market than there will be baby boomers. All right? So now, do we care about what they know? Do we care about what they buy? Do we care about their attitudes towards work and everything else? And the answer is absolutely we do, because they, by the way, are also the largest generation that this country has ever seen, larger than the baby boomers. All right? So this really does matter. All right. Let me talk a little bit about projected top U.S. job growth. Okay, jobs, 2014 to 2016, projected. The number one, this is across the entire country, the number one metro area at about a 4% average growth rate is Midland, Texas. And why is that? Because it's an oily place out there, all right? But interestingly, other than St. George, Utah, which is a little bitty place that's really cool down by Bryan, Bryce National Park, right? And Greeley, Colorado, which is sitting outside the outskirts of Denver and is the home of all kinds of debauchery. Austin, Texas is number 4 in the country. Number 4 projected metro through 2016 in the metro. I just grabbed the top 27 out of this. Notice if I just go 27 deep, and this includes 338 different metro areas in the state, in the country. Texas has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 metro areas projected for job growth in the country. So the state across the board is projected to have major job growth. Are all areas created the same? And the answer is certainly not. Here are the unemployment rates. This is from August. Midland, Odessa, 2.8, 3.4. And those rates have been down there that low for a good 4 years now. All right, what does that mean? That means that if you need a job, this is a nice place to go. Interesting, however, look at the top, I don't know, what are this, top 5, 6, 7? Where are they? They're all out there in West Texas. And when we look at the demographics of where the population and labor force growth is in the state, is it out there in West Texas? And the answer is no. It's all focused in the major metropolitan areas of the state. So we've got some interesting structural changes between where a lot of that oil and gas is creating jobs and where our people and our labor force are. Interestingly, down here, if you want a job in Odessa, Wendy's is hiring fast food prep workers, $16 an hour. $16 an hour, plus a signing bonus. All right. Why? Because they're just at 3.4%, 3%, there just aren't enough people, period, right, to take any kind of job. Try to find a school bus driver at Odessa, all right? Because everybody with a commercial driver's license in the oil field is doing what? Driving an oil field truck, right? Making big money. All right. However, the rest of the state is not exactly the same. So you've got the Brownsville, Harlingen, McAllen, Edinburgh area, well below historical averages, I might say, but still pretty different than the oil field area. Okay. Again, here's a chart that I want to show because it shows this oiliness of job growth here in the state. Don't pay any attention to the numbers, other than this goes back to 1995 through the present. Just look at the slope. Here's the job growth across the board in the state. This blue line is mining. So notice in the recession it took a dip, and this is what's happened after the recession. Look at that trajectory. So everything related to oil and gas in the mining sector, significant. Manufacturing down here took a dip, has had a steady recovery here. We have net job growth in manufacturing, but I will guarantee you, because I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of manufacturers and work with a lot of manufacturers, is that they are crying for a whole new, unique skill set that's related to numeric process control, welders out the wazoo trying to find those people, industrial machinery mechanics, a lot of people keeping the lines in the factories moving, while at the same time they're laying people off. Old line people that don't have the skill sets they used to. So there's a lot of what we call creative destruction going on in the manufacturing sector. And then as you see, professional business services up. Construction, after the recession, kind of went sideways. Why? Because we had a lot of housing stock and stuff already, had to work its way off. But as that happened, then construction employment has started to really turn up. Okay. Here are the industries that have added the most jobs, August to August. YOY is year over year. If you're an economic development person, then you see goods producing industries growing at 4.1% and service providing industries growing at 3.4%. All you think of is, wow, that's really nice balance, right? That's a really nice balance in an economy. Here's the other part. Industries adding the most jobs, mostly in service-related industries here. Okay. You mentioned healthcare. Healthcare is a big deal. In 1990, these are the major sectors. These are the sectors by color that dominated these region economies. All right? By 2014, here are the sectors that dominated. All that blue is healthcare. All right? So healthcare is a major economic driver, not only because of population, but for a number of other reasons. Start looking at population-rated area, employment recovery. Austin, right here. This trajectory of the Austin recovery, you can see everybody, all these 5 major metropolitan areas above the U.S., but Austin is even more than all the rest of them. Okay? Here's the one chart I want to show you. You go, wow, Rich, that is the coolest chart I've ever seen. But here's what I want you to show. This line over here, this is wages. This is annual average job openings, and the size of the bubble is the percent growth rate. Now, the one thing I want you to take a look at is, regardless of all of these occupational titles, is there a difference between jobs where earnings are down here versus jobs where earnings are up here? In other words, a bifurcation on the earnings scale. And the answer is absolutely. Now, these are our projections through 2022. So what you see here is the ones at the top of this scale up here all seem to have what? An IT-related flavor to them, all right? An IT-related flavor to them. These that are down here, keep in mind as we go this way, I'm talking about a lot of jobs, but these that are down here on the earnings scale, a lot of jobs, but from an earnings standpoint, what do they look like? Relatively low. All right, so this bifurcation of the labor market and of earnings is very real here in the Austin labor market. Okay. Here are the capital areas, highest paying occupations, highest paying occupations. Anything interesting about this list? The skill sets tend to be dominated by what? IT and math-oriented occupations. Let me skip by some of this stuff because this is fun. This is technology and the impact of technology on the labor market. This is the Nike Distribution Warehouse Center. Anything missing from this picture? Okay, shoes is the first answer. Not really sure why that is, all right? But number two is people. So there's a couple of people. These people are down here, and I got one over here, I got one over here. Do they look like they're doing anything important? If they're not doing anything important, what are we paying them? We're not paying them much. Who is the most important people in this picture? It's the ones that you don't see that are keeping this line moving, that are programming and doing all the rest of that stuff. Okay? Let me skip through some of this stuff because I know you want to move on. We talk about where the job openings now are in the state. Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, shouldn't surprise you, it's very consistent. This is what they look like occupationally. Occupationally. So when you start looking at this list occupationally, you see an interesting mix of higher education occupations and those that don't require a lot of education. But what you also see on this list is a continuation of that bifurcation of earnings. This is what they look like for Williamson County. This is what they look like for the Austin metro area. Anything interesting about this? Somebody put these in blue. I'm not really sure what he was thinking. But there seems to be a theme through these with the most job postings. And is there a relationship between IT-related skill sets and occupations and demand and earnings? And the answer is yes. This is not a value judgment, people. This is not saying that other occupations and other areas are not important. All this is saying is the labor market is rewarding certain things. It is what it is. It is what the economy is rewarding. All right. Here's our projected fastest growing occupations. Projected fastest growing occupations. Not necessarily most openings, but fastest growing in Texas through 2022. Anything interesting about that list? Between health and healthcare and IT-related occupations dominate this list. Fastest growing that require higher education. I'm defining higher education as either an associate's, bachelor's degree, or higher. But it starts as an associate's degree, bachelor's degree, or higher. Anything interesting about this list? Do you see any healthcare relationships here? Absolutely. Here are our highest earning college programs. I showed you this last year. These are new 2013 data, and guess what? If I just changed 2012 to 2013, you wouldn't know the difference, all right? So the patterns are not changing in terms of what the labor market is rewarding relative to programs. Here are our lowest earning college programs. Our lowest earning college programs. Now, notice that there's a sizable difference between what a petroleum engineer makes 1 year post-exit, all right, and what your average ecology, evolution, and population biology student makes, all right? Again, not a value judgment, just what the labor market is telling us. This continues to be more true than ever. the more accomplished you are at applied mathematics in a problem-solving environment, the more valuable you are as an employee. Here are the highest earning associate's degree programs. Associate degree programs, right here. Notice these earnings. Do they look a whole lot more like this? Or like this? And the answer is a whole lot more like this. Okay. And this is what our kids are studying. So when I look at this list of what our kids are studying, interestingly, what happens is what they're majoring in, what they originally choose to major in, looks very similar to the demand from an enrollment standpoint. But what happens when they persist? They go away from a lot of these occupational areas that are in demand, and they end up with degrees in evolutionary biology, psychology, history, political science. Not saying those are bad degrees, just says they're important. Okay. A couple of things here. Let me wrap this up.
You should show one slide.
Want me to see this?
With the kids.
I'm going to show you this one. What? 1 minute. Okay. Charles Schwab did this survey, asked our young people how much they expected to make when they got their first job. Everybody have a number in mind? Oh, they also asked, what will be your salary once they're established in a career? Number one, $73,000. $73,000. Their first job right out of school. $150,000 once they get established in their career. And the question to that is, do they need a reality check? The answer is, yes, they do. So we've created this program. For those of you who have never seen it, it's called www.Texas Reality Check. We let kids go in, build a lifestyle aspirational budget, and then say, okay, after you've got where you're going to live and what you're going to drive, and do you have to have a cell phone and all these other things, you say, this is what your lifestyle is going to cost you. Now let's see what kind of occupations will allow you to be able to afford that lifestyle. And by the way, the Workforce Commission gets over 1 million page views a month on that website. And they stay on average 15 minutes on the website, which for those of you that are keeping track of internet metrics is an unheard of number. All right. So it's kind of interesting. All right. Here's my wrap up. And I'm not going to do all of this because I only really want to focus on one aspect. And that is getting a job is a balance between will and skill. And I tell you what, for the last 2 years in particular, people aren't talking about skills, they're talking to me about attitudes, behaviors, and will. And so when we start talking about workplace basics, getting along with others, critical thinking, for those of you that are in the executive function world and disability world, the concept of conscientiousness is the significant variable here. Do you say that you're going to, do you follow through with what you say you're going to do? Are you conscientious about your behaviors, your interactions with the community? So when we start talking about these workplace basics, they are of paramount importance. These are the kinds of things you see: leadership, teamwork, appreciation, diversity, conflict management. You'll recognize most of these. I really want to show you this chart. And that is, at the Workforce Commission, the last thing I set in place was the collection of a database that allowed us to look at soft skills that we call workplace basics, and the ability to look at an occupation and see what the soft skill patina of that occupation is. Because not all occupations essentially require all the same particular soft skills. So this is what a waiter and waitress profile looks like. The most significant, obviously an employer would want all the soft skills, right? But the ones that are most significant to this particular occupation: customer service, oral communication, attention to detail. Does that sound like something that makes some sense for a waiter and waitress? Absolutely it does. The reason we care about this is, for those of you in the HR world, wouldn't you like to be able to ask a question about goodness of fit and attitudes and behaviors that could be empirically backdropped with information that says the reason I'm asking this question is because these are critical workplace basics to this particular job. Oh, and by the way, when you look at a chemical engineer, it's a little different. Problem solving, numeric and arithmetic application, critical thinking skills, different than a waiter and waitress. So with that, I thank you very much for you inviting me back to do this again. Have a great event. Thank you very much.